Hey there, this is Perch, and let's talk a little bit about continuity. Continuity is a big topic in comics, and it's one that I think is often misunderstood or mischaracterized. And I want to just kind of dispel some of the myths that have gone on around it, because as a topic, it's changed a lot over the years. In the 70s and 80s, continuity was not a bad word, it was a good thing. A lot of editors, a lot of writers talked about it as if it was their secret weapon, and it was because continuity as a topic in comics actually meant that the writer had a crutch, if you will, or something to fall back on. A platform is probably the better word of being able to write a story with a lot of existing history. So when you wanted to create a storyline, you want to create a villain, you want to create some conflict, you weren't starting scratch. You were starting from past background and a lot of different threads and story elements that you can draw from. That's the value of continuity. And for a long time, comics leveraged that continuity in pretty strong ways. And then, of course, more comics and more decades go by, and the continuity gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And some people leverage that better than others. I think a good writer is one who can craft a tale that doesn't require hundreds of comics of reading before you can understand the story. They're able to give you the flavor of it, but not forced reading. And then DC did Crisis, and it was interesting because if you live through that time period, people have a way of kind of revisionist history of what Crisis was trying to achieve and why DC did it. The short answer for why DC did Crisis was money. It was an event. It was written by some top talent. It was going to put a lot of things up on the table, and then they had kind of some new artists, some new writers, some new people coming onto the team post crisis. John Byrne, kind of one of them, that was going to help set the stage for the next millennia or next decade or so of DC Comics. But very quickly, and a couple of creators involved, and then definitely some editors and some store owners and other people started passing around the narrative that Crisis was about simplifying continuity. And I shouldn't be too disparaging about it. It's not, a conspiracy theory or some crazy comment. It was a narrative that people in DC in an official capacity were putting out there, that this was a way of streamlining continuity and getting new fans. That all sounds fine, but as the years have gone by, it's been used kind of as a lightning rod to explain away continuity as necessary at all. The argument being, well, if things get too complicated, just have to pull a crisis here and clean things up again because otherwise you're going to lose readers. And it's that bit of logic that really sticks for me because it's not accurate and it defies what we see on a month by month numbers basis. And I'll give you this example. Um, Both publishers do events on a regular basis. And when they do events, that event tends to sell really well. There's a whole argument made right now that Marvel has gotten so addictive to doing events that they're just in continual event mode. And that's not healthy for the business either because it's eroding the individual titles. But if you look at the sales for the events, what you typically find, and what you found for the last 15 years or so, longer, is that the first issue of the event sells really, really well. 100,000 copies is not unheard of for an event plus. And then there's, of course, there's a taper off for, issue 2, issue 3, and so on of the event. But something else that happens in the event is that if it catches, then the supporting titles start to sell, either recent titles or in the back issue market. And think about it for a moment. War of the Realms is coming out now for Marvel and selling really well. Lots of nice copies of that title going up on the shelf. And if you look at the kind of the core book that led into it, which is Thor, yes, the Avengers and Spider-Man and all these other characters are in War of the Realms, but it sprung from Thor. Thor's been the seeding ground for this event. And the monthly copies of Thor are less than half of what War of the Realms is selling, which means that double the audience of the continuity of Thor got on board for War of the Realms. So look at it this way. It means that a good percentage of buyers were not intimidated by the heavy continuity and all the back issue storylines and everything else with Thor. They felt confident enough that they would be able to pick up War of the Realms and get a story they'd be able to understand. And if they didn't, or something intrigued them about it, they could always go back and buy those comics and get caught up on the event. And there's an old kind of inside comic shop rule of thumb that says that when you're doing your orders for events, when you're looking at kind of the issue 3, 4, 5 of the event, you look at the sales of the first issue. You know they're not going to be at the same level, but how well it holds up is really dependent on how much auxiliary sales you see in the other titles. So in other words, if War of the Realms #1 comes out and it sells really well, and I see an interest in the shop of back issues of Thor and other things leading up to War of the Realms, then I know that there's a established strong interest in the event, and I order higher for the later issues. If the first issue comes out and it sells really well, but there's zero pickup of the events leading up to it, then I know that the event is probably going to start to plummet. And you really saw this with things like Axis, which I thought Axis was a fine storyline, but there was little to no pickup of back issue trade of Uncanny Avengers and some of the other events leading up to Axis, which was a bad sign. It meant that the series itself was not going to sustain the interest. And so I say all that from the standpoint of, again, continuity. So this argument is that, well, you have to make things really accessible to new readers. You have to make it a good jumping on point. You can't have too much backstory, except almost every single event that has come out, certainly by Marvel over the last decade, has had a significant amount of backstory. Axis, as we mentioned before, had Uncanny Avengers. Secret Invasion had storylines in Mighty and New Avengers. Civil War had a long lead up of storylines going into that. All of these series, Infinity, even Civil War 2, which was a dud, or Secret Empire, had a long lead up, often a year or more, of comics that kind of fed into this event. So it's inaccurate, and it's proven every year when an event comes out that fans are adverse to continuity. They tend to like it. They tend to buy in, and it doesn't faze them. They do go and buy comics and enjoy them. So it's kind of a roundabout way of saying, continuity remains a powerful tool for comics, because at its most cynical, it means that you can sell a comic and you can put a storyline in that comic that it doesn't bring much new to the table. You can just rely on past events, past storylines that other writers put in play to give your character depth, to give the conflict meaning, and to do a lot of things with it. If you continually reboot and you reshuffle everything, then you lose that ability. Now you're telling stories based on the strength of your comic and your story alone, which, depending on the writer, may work, may not work. Another thing that dealt a blow to continuity as a positive thing came in the 90s, and that's where people point to a lot of the Image Rebellion and the artists there basically going out and putting out comics that were brand new, no history, no continuity, and they sold really, really well. But I would argue that's not a fair comparison at all, because, being honest, if you have Jim Lee and Todd McFarlane and Rob Liefeld and some of these other creators, at the time they were the hottest thing in all of comics. And even today, while there are popular artists and there are creators people love, it's not the same. You put Jim Lee's name on something, it sells. It doesn't matter. And so the fact that they went off and made these new titles without continuity and they sold well, I don't think has anything to do with continuity or comics, and everything to do with the power of those creators. The reality is, if you put Jim Lee on Legion of Superheroes issue number 480 and you just jumped him right into a big storyline, it would have sold well, particularly if you would have marketed it and hyped it like the Image titles had. Continuity is not a barrier to bringing new readers to the table. Anyone who says otherwise is frankly just finding an excuse for why things aren't selling. You put a popular writer or a strong writer and an artist on a title, and things will do just fine. Jonathan Hickman proved that over and over when he was put onto titles at Marvel. relaunch or no, and yes, relaunches and brand new number ones certainly do spike sales, but sustainable sales, it's okay. And in fact, it's actually a big plus when creators can frankly turn a title around and put hard work and sales into something that has the opportunity for back issue sales. The industry is healthier when a comic book has a really popular run because a creative team comes on and does something special with it, and people go back to try and fill in the gaps of their collection. That's a good thing. It's a good thing for comic shops, and it's a good thing for readers. Granted, maybe it doesn't impact the publisher that much because the publisher's not seeing that back issue revenue. They've already sold the comic, but it makes for a stronger foundation. When you have a stronger foundation, it's like borrowing money from a bank. It's credibility that you get to borrow against your title. And that's a good thing. So this is one of those topics that people get kind of passionate about. And there's definitely this tribal wisdom that if you want to attract new readers to the table, you got to give them something super, super simple to buy in on. And I would just counter with a lot of readers came to comics in the 70s and 80s. There weren't relaunched number ones, and people figured it out. Somehow, some way, people jumped in all throughout Chris Claremont's X-Men run, which was dense as hell. People jumped into John Byrne's Fantastic Four run, which had all kinds of characters and a supporting cast that spanned 20, 25 years. It's not impossible to get new readers without treating them like idiots. People will figure it out. They're smarter than you think. Anyway, that's my little bit on continuity. Let me know what you think. This is one of those topics that people have very, very strong opinions on, not always based on facts and numbers, but based on gut feel. And, I've been in the business long enough to say you don't ignore gut feel. Your gut usually tells you what's right. But in this case, I think that continuity is still a friend. And I think it's something that has been kind of beat up a lot in comics over the years. And it deserves another look. It deserves a helping hand. Anyway, thanks for listening. If you'd like to, I'd love it if you subscribed. That would be great. If you want to have notifications, you can have those too. And if you want to recommend topics, go ahead and do it in the comments below, or reach out to me on Twitter at comicperch at Twitter. What am I saying? Thanks a lot for listening, and talk to you soon.